Hello, emerging and evolving leaders. I'm Christine Rozier, host of the Irrelevant Leader podcast and founder of the Leadership Collaborative and Rozier Retreats. My platforms are dedicated to expanding the pool of exceptional leaders. I'm honored to be your leadership expert today. I believe that every person has the potential to become an extraordinary leader, and in doing so, significantly impact the lives of others. Extraordinary leadership begins with mindset. Relevant leaders are committed to developing the qualities necessary to successfully lead others, qualities that are cultivated and refined over time. Throughout the Irrelevant Leader podcast series, some of the world's most relevant leaders and I examine the behaviors and characteristics of irrelevant leaders. Tune in as we dig deep into identifying what goes wrong when a leader moves down the path from powerful leadership to ineffectual leadership. Join me for live call-in sessions, one-on-one interviews, and thought leadership segments as high-profile leaders and I explore what it takes for you to avoid the blight of dreaded irrelevancy and outline how you can achieve and maintain your place among the world's most profound and relevant leaders. Thank you again for listening. Let's get to today's episode. Welcome to today's episode of the Irrelevant Leader podcast, where we will be engaging in real, raw, and respectful leadership discussions. I am thrilled and delighted to have as my special guest today, Wendy Coulter. As CEO of Hummingbird, a brand strategy agency founded in 1995, Wendy Coulter is committed to providing clients insightful, big ideas, intuitive innovation, and inspired creative solutions. With over 30 years of sales, marcom, and branding experience, Wendy's passion is to help clients more effectively communicate the positioning of their business, differentiate their brand, and grow revenue. She has grown Hummingbird by helping clients shift brand equity from the business owner to the business entity, strengthening the company's promise, presence, and profitability over time. Wendy and Hummingbird have won numerous community, business, and industry awards, and she is a published author. She serves on many local nonprofit boards, and she frequently presents on topics including leadership, business growth, and branding. She is the Hummingbird and holds true to her vision to fly forward, backwards, upside down, and sideways to drive success. Thank you, Wendy, for being with us today, and let's get started. As a leader, what does relevance mean to you?
Christine, thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to do this interview with you today. And relevance for me as a leader has to do with understanding that business is a continuum and that there's so much change that having been in business for almost 30 years now, a lot has changed. And I've been in the marketing industry, and so everything has changed over and over and over and over again. And so understanding there's this continuum, and you have to be ready for change. And if you put yourself in the right places with the right people, then you find relevance. You understand what the changes are, and you may not know every change that's coming, so maybe not economic changes and those sorts of things, but you know the changes going on around you. And so you can respond better to that.
Very nice. Thank you. And so what are some of the ways and practices that you yourself engage in to remain relevant?
So I think to the point I was just making, one really important thing for me as a leader is to show up. I've always shown up. Even when I was really young, I found myself at a lot of different events with a lot of different types of people. And I'm not like a well-traveled person. I've been in North Carolina all my life, and I do travel in the U.S., but I've not been like all over the world. But I do make sure that I am around diverse people and that I'm listening to diverse ideas and that I'm open to those ideas and learning from them, and helping me learn how to have that intuition and that innovation that's so important to me being a creative business owner and helping find new ways for businesses to communicate about themselves. So I think showing up is really important. The other thing that I I believe really helps me engage and remain relevant is staying positive and understanding that I can't control the things that I can't control, but I'm a glass half full person. And I choose to be a glass half full person. There are a lot of glass half empty people in the world. And I feel like when you think that you can control everything, or when you get really caught up in the things that you can't control, then it stifles creativity and it stifles your ability to stay relevant because you're not open to new ideas.
Mm-hmm. And I love your comment about stifling creativity by engaging in controlling behaviors. And I had never really put those two things together, but it makes perfect sense that if I'm attempting to control and lock something down, I'm not open to, as you were saying,
Absolutely.
creativity. I'm not open to diverse ideas. I'm not open to innovation.
Right.
So that's what an interesting way to look at that. And it makes complete sense. Makes complete sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
In this ever changing, continuously changing work environment, if you were looking for characteristics of someone whose intention was to remain relevant, or looking at your own intention to remain relevant, what would be some of the characteristics, say perhaps 3 characteristics that you would want to identify within yourself, or perhaps a leader that you were hiring and you wanted to be certain that this person was interested in remaining relevant over time?
So I think the number one thing is respecting others' opinions and showing them that you listen to them, not only by sitting and listening to them, but by putting things in action that they might bring to the table, really showing people that you listen to them, having empathy for their situation. In terms of hiring, I was at a meeting last week and someone said, well, I hire employees, but people show up. And at first, I laughed at that probably for the wrong reason. And then as I thought more about that, that's really what we're dealing with, especially right now, where people have a different perspective on their personal lives and want respect for their own time and their time with their families and those sorts of things. And so I think that's a respect thing too. And then I think thoughtfulness would be another characteristic that I think relevant leaders need to have. Some of the best leaders that I've worked with are very thoughtful and much more intentional about the way they show respect to people. They take time to think about things. I'm very much an action-oriented person, so I have to make myself slow down sometimes so that the person on the other side understands that I do respect them. And I do respect other people, but I think people in leadership roles are very dynamic and we have a lot of energy, and sometimes that can be misinterpreted as we only care about getting to the next thing. And so this idea of slowing down and being intentional and thoughtful and respectful of others in a leadership role helps you engage and stay relevant to what everyone cares about in the room.
I hear a lot of self-awareness in that, which I think is extremely important, an extremely important
Absolutely.
characteristic of relevant leadership. It's
Absolutely.
part of a high emotional intelligence quotient.
Yes.
I know you serve on many boards, and as you're talking about showing up, that's what I was thinking of, all the places that you show up. So can you tell us a little bit about how those experiences, not only as leading your own organization, but the experiences of being on local boards and nonprofits has continued developing you as a leader and certainly as a relevant leader?
So I think one thing that I struggled with early on is I did not have a corporate position before I started my company. So I had a job and it was in a nonprofit. And so I did not learn the proper way to do business necessarily starting out. And so I think without that corporate experience, you have to figure out how you're going to be relevant because you don't have that experience that other people have. And so being involved in organizations and specifically serving on boards has given me the ability to understand how the boardroom works, to understand how different boardrooms work. I've had the opportunity to lead groups of women. I've had the opportunity to lead groups of mainly men. I've seen the nuances of different types of diversity in the boardroom. And between that and really paying attention with my clients who are corporate with what's going on within their worlds, I feel like that has really helped me stay relevant. But then the other side of that, to your point of showing up, I mean, I get the opportunity to go to economic development meetings to learn what is going on in my region, my state. And I even get to travel to other states to see what's happening in other metros with what they're doing with economic development and development in general. And it really helps to see that and bring those ideas back. And then just the experience of leadership. Being a part of a board does not mean that you've made it. It's an opportunity to grow and learn and have some personal and professional development that you don't get anywhere else except in a boardroom. So that's been phenomenal for me to help me gain confidence that I can lead larger groups. I can be a leader within corporate situations as well, which I didn't have the opportunity to do if I would not have served on boards and committees along the way.
Fantastic, fantastic. And you mentioned that one of your struggles was you had not been in the corporate environment. Could you share with the audience perhaps some of the other struggles that you have experienced on your way to being a relevant leader? And what were some of the things that challenged you?
So I think the majority of my internal struggles have to do with confidence. I've been in business for a very long time, and so the confidence is better than it's ever been before. But you still have that imposter syndrome that everybody's talking about these days, kind of sneaking in from time to time, whether I've got a big presentation to make or I spoke last week and the speech was very emotional for me. I am a very emotional and passionate person, and I have to remind myself that's okay. There was a time when that wouldn't have been okay in my world, but I think I'm there now where I give myself grace. And sometimes I think I'm even more impactful because of my passion and my emotion. And so just making sure to give myself grace and then overcoming the fear, so I got emotional during that. What's going to happen? I have learned over the years that most of the things I fear never come to be reality. So I would say that idea of just not having fear, going into things with a lot of confidence and excitement and pushing through that has been really important for my leadership roles. And then I think the other thing around that has been a challenge to me as a leader is I've been pretty oblivious. And I'm proud to be an oblivious person because in some ways it served me really well. When I was young, I would walk in rooms of very important people and not know who they were and walk up to anybody and talk to them. And it helped me grow up. Today, I try not to be so oblivious and understanding that people are judging. And so there is a piece to leadership where people have a certain expectation of you and they do judge you, and finding that balance between the fun and excitement and passion of being oblivious and the side that says, okay, that person on the third row is noticing that I didn't have my eyebrows waxed last week, like those kinds of things. So I think that's probably enough of my personal challenges. I could go on and on all day.
I really appreciate your transparency. And I think it's fantastic that we are at a place where we're talking about and have been talking about this imposter syndrome. In my experience, more people suffer from that than don't suffer from that. So I think to normalize it and to share that that's been part of your journey is, first of all, very courageous, and I appreciate it. And I think it paves the way for others to give permission to themselves that is part of the journey, is that syndrome for most people.
And I was this 24-year-old young girl designing logos from North Carolina who hadn't traveled anywhere else. And sometimes I have to remember I'm not that person anymore, and that I do have all of these experiences behind me and around me, and all of these amazing people who show me that I can do whatever I want to do as a leader. It's certainly not a path you go alone. And I think that's the wonderful thing about it.
Yes. Yes. And again, I appreciate that you brought that up, because I'm sure most of the audience listening either has experienced that. They might be experiencing that now. And as you said earlier, it's okay. Most people do. So thank you very much for that. What are some of your thoughts about the Great Resignation as it continues? And I actually read an article the other day about now it's the Great Executive Resignation. So what are some thoughts about what has caused that and why we continue to see it perpetuating?
So I think for the boomers, it was just time. My parents are boomers, and I think if they had still been in their jobs, they wouldn't be at this point because they were so close. And so I think for that group, which is a really large group, a big part of our workforce, it was time. And the pandemic and different things that have gone on, whether it's politics or economy or whatever, caused them to realize it was time. I think the younger people are finding their way, and it's really interesting because when I was in my 20s, I worked 80 hours a week, and that's what I did. But now I have a family and I have a child, and I did that older, and a lot of my younger employees did that at a younger age, and they want that balance, and they know that they can work remote. So why not? Right. And so I think when they get into situations where there's not the flexibility for their families and they have to be in a place all the time to do their job, they start thinking, well, maybe there is something else that would be better for my life. I also think with the pandemic, this survival instinct kicked in for so many people. And whether a family member got sick or a close friend got sick and something, terrible happened, as we saw this, we had this aha moment of I may need to do something different. I had that moment, but I didn't resign. I own my company, but I understand the people who have moved on. I think what's really interesting in my industry is I see more of that like gig economy happening, and gig is great. Like I really applaud young people who do it because I happened to do it in the 90s, but there wasn't a word for it, right? So I had my gig and it was Hummingbird, but it was a freelance position at the time, and I was working for some different companies. And so I really respect this gig economy. And I think it's really amazing. Like, I work with one young man who builds websites, and he lives on a boat. And it's like, wait, how do you have internet service? But he does, and he can do that. And that's the life he's chosen to live, and he can support himself doing it. And then I know another young lady, and she's in the web development industry as well, but more on the tech side. And she travels all over the world, and she demands a higher rate than we did as younger people, and she gets it, and she can afford her life. And so I think that the Great Resignation has just really been about a survival instinct and understanding there are things more important than in life than work. And making that a priority that it really hasn't been. I mean, if we look at prior generations, it really was all about the career, the job. I'm going to be at a company until I retire, and I have a big pension that follows me and takes me to the grave. And that's not the way it has to be. And we've realized that. And we're actually kind of reaping the rewards of that, quite honestly, I think now with the Great Resignation. I think it's really hard as an employer. So I think we're posting 2 jobs in the next week, and I know I'll just need to be patient and wait to find the right person. They're not going to just be there, and they're going to have certain demands, and we'll have to come to terms with whether there's a good culture fit, whether they meet the same core values as the company. And that will dictate some of what I think the demands are that will be, expected and made. So I do keep saying, where did like all the people go who worked in hair salons, nail salons, restaurants, retail? What are they doing? But I've hired at least one who moved into a more white collar from that situation. And, he wanted more freedom, and he wanted, more for his free time and his family, and more ability to travel and things like that. And he was tied to restaurant world. I mean, you're tied to it. I did retail when I was in college, and you're tied to certain hours. You're tied to being there. And so it'll be interesting to see how those types of jobs and those industries adapt over time and change, because we're not going.
No, we're not. Thank you for that. I think about, as I watch everything that's happening out there in business, this sort of realignment, and you just illustrated that with the story of this young man who'd gone from the restaurant industry into your industry because he's looking for more flexibility. And I continue to hear that from people. They want more flexibility, this balance that we didn't have when we were introduced into business. You were saying you worked 80 hours. That's not very balanced.
No.
So, and they're looking for that today.
Well, and at the time I wasn't looking for balance. So it's also about, I was looking for, something to put my passion into. And, that's certainly changed for me over time too, right?
Sure.
When you get married, have a family, and my parents are older now, so I'm kind of that sandwich place now. I've got the child and I've got the parents, and I want to spend more time with both of them. So I get it, and I think having empathy as a leader for that situation. I mean, there probably was a time, I know for a fact there was a time that I had an employee whose child was in school in another county, and whenever they called to say that child was sick or whatever, she had to leave and go pick them up. And it was frustrating to me as a leader at that point in time. Today, it wouldn't be so frustrating, but we have different technology today.
Sure.
She would have the ability to work from another county. I mean, I've got someone in Washington State working for Hummingbird here in North Carolina, and we've got freelancers all over the place. And so the time has come. It's a wonderful thing. I think the 20-somethings don't know how lucky they are.
I would agree. And it reminds me of the conversation we were having prior to starting this podcast around innovation. It's forced tremendous innovation. And I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think innovation, just to go back to kind of this relevant leadership discussion, I think if you don't understand innovation, and I understand it at its core because I went through NC State School of Design, and the design process is all about brainstorming and innovation. And so it just was part of me coming into the work environment. But if you don't understand innovation, I think relevancy is really hard, because I don't think you're keeping up with trends and understanding what those changes are that could come, or imagining changes that could come yourself that you could create within your organization. And that's amazing leadership, when you can create something new and different within your own organization.
Yes, it is. It absolutely. In terms of, if you could pinpoint one failing that really impacted you throughout your career or during your experience of growing into your career, what would that be?
So I was the little engine that could, and I thought I could do anything, and then I knew I could do anything. But when I put myself in situations with people who I thought would be amazing mentors when I was young, I joined a Vistage-like group very early on in owning Hummingbird, and I was completely overwhelmed by input. That probably was amazing input, but at the time, it was like too much for me to manage, and I didn't have the experiences that these people had who were trying to help me. And so I would say, oh my gosh, I can't take all this in. And I would go make probably the decision that I had planned to make anyway. And I think over not a long period of time, I started to convince myself I was not like coachable or mentorable. And I was just going to do my own thing because I knew I could. So that glass half full thing and that positive energy kind of thing, I think actually worked against me because I was not open enough to input and understanding that when people give you input, you need to take from it what you will take from it and not be frozen by the input to the point that you can't make a decision, which is, I think that really is the failing that I had because today I'm very open. I have mentors. I look to people as mentors who don't know that they're my mentors, but I ask them questions about how they might handle a situation. They share their opinion with me. And I also hire coaches and go into coaching and peer group situations now with the idea of, well, I want to understand best practices and I want to understand how other people would choose to make a decision. And then I can choose what works for me, and that's okay. And I think at a young age, I just was caught up in, oh my gosh, I just can't take all of this in. It's just too much. But I think it stifled me for too long. It took me too long to come back around and say, okay, I'm willing to listen now and understand that I still can make a good decision, but other people's input can influence me and give me other perspectives that are really important.
So I hear the both and, like I wasn't not relying solely on myself and not expecting myself to absorb everything that everyone is telling me. Am I
Right.
hearing that correctly?
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
that's a great approach. So what final thought or practice would you leave for the audience today? Something that would help them start developing one of the leadership characteristics that you see as important and you have mentioned during our podcast.
I think one thing that I'm noticing in the workplace today, and a lot of it is with clients and just people in general that I'm with in networking events, is there doesn't seem to be a lot of positivity back in the world yet. I mean, I think people are anxious to be back together and be in positive situations, but I think a lot of people are just in a very negative space. And I'm not. I'm positive and I'm energetic and I'm excited about the things that are coming and the innovation that is happening in the world. And, I would say take the time to enjoy what is happening around you and not get too caught up in always questioning the what if something negative happened. And I mean, I have team members around me that sometimes do this too. And I think we have to be more positive, glass half full about that in order to get through to the other side. Was at a meeting yesterday and the man speaking was talking about how a minute of laughter can boost your immune system for up to 8 hours. And then I researched that after the event, and I found that it's up to 24 hours. But the opposite, a minute of being upset over something has a much longer term effect on the immune system. And given that we are in a different sense of immunity now in our world and the viruses that are out there and everything that we're dealing with, we need to be very focused on healthy living and being positive, and happiness is a really big part of that. And we have control of that. I can choose when I wake up in the morning whether I'm going to smile all day or whether I'm going to go around huffy and, upset. And so we just need to, I think, keep that in mind that affects our health. It affects other people around us, and it affects where our businesses and our ability to innovate and move things forward goes.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic tool and technique. And as you said, especially for this time, as the world is trying to figure out what it's going to look like now. And our choice is to either look at that in a very positive, excited way or to be, drawn down by that, and how it actually is a choice if we could simply remember that. So I really appreciate that, and I'm sure our audience will very much appreciate that technique and that tool and that reminder.
Thank you again for having me. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. It's
Yeah.
been wonderful, and I'm sure the audience learned a lot and can take the tools and the ideas and concepts that you've conveyed and put them into practice right away, which is extremely important. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining me, Christine Rozier, and the Irrelevant Leader podcast series. Remember this: you are more extraordinary and capable than you think. To become the leader you aspire to be, you need the right tools and support to assist you in developing and maintaining the characteristics found in great and relevant leaders. That's why I host the Irrelevant Leader podcast, direct the year-long leadership collaborative, and Rozier Leadership Retreats. Visit the website at christinerozier.com, that's spelled Rosier, to learn more. Check out the podcast page for upcoming live events and interviews with amazing, relevant leaders. If you're not already on the mailing list, then please sign up to join me and this powerful network of exceptional leaders.